Well, hello, beautiful people. We got a little bit of a different angle. Like we're pretty close up. I'm liking it. Today I'm here to share with you 23 authors that I want to read in 2023. I was kind of wondering if I wanted to have a TBR for an entire year. And in the past, I've done things like gone to some of my favorite booktubers and looked at what their favorite books were from the previous year. And if I had them on my shelves, I would add them. And I was like, you know what? I just want to read some tried and true authors that I really enjoy. It's like guaranteed to make me read some good books, basically. These are authors I truly trust with my happiness in terms of reading, at least. Winnie's in the room, so there might be a kerfuffle. She is sniffing my books at the moment. Always makes me nervous. So here are 23 authors that I want to read in 2023 and some of their books, which may or may not be the books that I choose to read by them, but let's see what happens. I have already started going through this list and I've started reading some of these books. So, okay, we're going to start with a book that I have read, an author that I have read already this year, and that is Maggie OFarrell. I adore Maggie OFarrell. She wrote I Am, I Am, I Am. She wrote Hamnet, and she wrote The Marriage Portrait, which, spoiler alert for my January wrap-up, I thoroughly enjoyed. This one, I'm going to go through this quickly because we've got 23 authors to talk about. This one follows a young girl, essentially, named Lucrezia. It is 1550 in Florence. Her sister is meant to marry a duke, I believe. And her sister promptly dies and Lucrezia is put in her place. At the beginning of this book, you find out, first of all, this book is based on a true story. And it follows a young girl who marries someone much older and then promptly dies 1 year later. And it's that story. It is gripping. In any case, Maggie OFarrell, already read. Wonderful. Now, second up is Grady Hendricks. I love a good Grady Hendricks book. He wrote the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. It's horror at its finest because it is horror that can be absolutely disturbing and creepy and also make you laugh wholeheartedly. I just finished reading How to Sell a Haunted House by him. Loved it so much. If you are scared of dolls, either pick this up because you want to get more scared of dolls or run the other way. Very, very fun. I just have a wonderful time reading him. Now, next up is Kate Atkinson, and I am planning on reading a lot of Kate Atkinson this year because I want to read an entire series by her. This is the Jackson Brodie series. It's a detective mystery series, and you follow Jackson Brodie as he goes ahead and solves all sorts of mysteries. And it starts with case histories. I haven't started this series yet. I should really get on it because I think this has 5 or 6 books in the series thus far. Next is Sarah Waters. We have not gotten anything new from Sarah Waters in such a long time. I don't know if she's still writing at this point, but there are a few books by her that I haven't read yet, including The Paying Guests. This was one of Lauren from Lauren and the Books, one of her favorites. This takes place in 1922, and I'm listening to this right now, and it follows a mother and her daughter who opened their house to a couple. And I think the idea is that they cannot afford this house anymore. This happened a lot at this time, kind of the fall of the aristocracy and the rise of the middle class. So we've got people moving in, and this is the only way that they're going to keep their house. And it's just about that dynamic. Now, I do believe that there's a romance in here between the women, the daughter of this house, and also the wife of the couple. So we shall see. Just started this one, but it's so nice to be in Sarah Waters' head again. She's got such a beautiful way of writing historical fiction. She's just up there. I think she's inspired a lot of writers. Another writer that I love that I haven't read in a long time is Daphne du Maurier. So I just grabbed Jamaica Inn. I have several on my shelves by her that I haven't read. I think The Scapegoat I have on my shelves. There are a few. So I just, you know, she is kind of the queen of Gothic mystery books, and it's been, I think, at least 3 years since I've read a Daphne du Maurier, and that's too long. Considering I have a few to get through, that's way too long for me. So I definitely want to pick her up. I would highly recommend starting with Rebecca if you have not read a Daphne du Maurier as of yet. Next is Ann Patchett. Again, I just grabbed Run, which is on my February TBR. But I have, I think 2 or 3 other Ann Patchetts on my shelves that I'd like to read. Maybe this year. She's also coming out with a new book, I believe in August. I've just kind of fallen more and more in love with Ann Patchett. I discovered her Instagram account. Her bookstore, Parnassus Books, has an Instagram account and she is featured on it regularly. And every time she talks about a book, she makes me want to read it. She has such a love for authors and books, which is not shocking considering she's an author herself, but I just love her. And yeah, I just want to read more by her. So yeah, I've got a ton of books by her that I want to read. Will I read them all this year? Probably not. I kind of like to savor my authors a lot of the time. So we'll see. But Run is probably what I'm going to read because it is on my February TBR. And next is Charlotte Bronte. I will probably read Villette by Charlotte Bronte. I read Jane Eyre twice now, but I've never read Villette. My sister gave me this chunky book many a moon ago. I think it's about a governess. And I also have the Bronte's whole collection on my Kobo. So I'll probably read it on my Kobo just because it is chunky and I find it easier to read that way. I think this is the only kind of classic author that I've got in this list, but I just adore Charlotte Bronte and the characters that she created. Yeah, Jane Eyre has like a very special place in my heart. After my epidural, I listened to Jane Eyre while I was in the midst of giving birth, essentially, to my daughter. So it really has a special place in my heart. And I'm hoping Villette will have the same kind of feeling. Probably won't be as special because I'm not having another child and that's not an option. So, but I still want to read it. Next up is Jane Healy. I read The Animals at Lockwood Manor last year. Really loved it. There was a lesbian romance in that book and it was dark and kind of gothic, historical fiction, World War I. I have one other book by her called The Ophelia Girls on my Kobo waiting for me. I just really like her writing style, and I definitely have like a kind of historical fiction that I like. I'm learning about myself, and it is slightly dark, usually follows women, slightly ordinary women in extraordinary circumstances. So I really want to read another Jane Healy this year. Again, kind of similar, although this is more mainstream historical fiction, I would say, is Susan Meissner. I really love Susan Meissner so very much. I'm picking up A Fall of Marigolds. I've got quite a few on my shelves that I haven't read yet. I think 3. But one of my friends, Tressa, recently mentioned that she read this and loved it. So this one follows a woman, I think 10 years after 9/11, and she's still struggling with the death of her husband, who died in the World Trade Center. And then it flashes back to September 1911. where the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire occurred. And it's about these two women losing the men that they love and their experience. And it sounds devastating. All of her books are slightly devastating, but I really love her. And she's also coming out with a new one this year. So maybe I'll read that or this. I don't know, but I will be reading Susan Meissner. That is for sure. Okay, we're moving into a little more of the thriller category at the moment. I'd love to read more Ruth Ware. I just really love Ruth Ware. She is coming out with a new book this year. I will be picking it up, but maybe I'll read more than one Ruth Ware. I will say, like, the earlier stuff that she's done, I've not always liked. This is an earlier book. This is The Woman in Cabin 10. I've heard very mixed reviews of this. Still want to read it and find out for myself. But like, for example, In a Dark, Dark Wood, I really didn't like it at all. But then The It Girl was one of my favorite books of 2022. So you just don't know. She has a lot of fun with her characters. They're not always characters you want to root for. There's always despicable characters in her stories, but I just really usually like them, the newer ones. So we'll see which Ruth Ware I pick up this year, but she had to be on the list. Now, Simone St James is another author I really like. She is much more horror. I would say it's like horror light. If you are new to horror, I think she's the best way to get into that genre. Very, very light. This book, The Haunting of Maddie Clare, takes place in the 1920s in England. So we've got historical fiction horror, and I believe that she started her career doing a lot of historical fiction horror, which is right up my alley. Her later books are sometimes historical fiction. They always harken back to the past, but it's not so far back. Sometimes they're more like 80s and that kind of thing. But you are definitely guaranteed to be slightly creeped out, but not so terrified that you won't be able to go to sleep at night. At least not for me, but I do love me a good horror book. So I definitely want to read Simone St. James. I don't think that she's got any new books coming out this year. She's got a novella that's already out. But I think at this point, because of her newfound like success, they're starting to republish some of her older books. So if you see some new books from Simone St. James this year, they're republishing the older ones, which is wonderful for her and gets them back in the mix. So I would do the exact same thing if I was in her place. God, this is going to be a long video. Next up is Nikki French. I don't love every single book that Nikki French comes out with, but this couple, you know, created the Frey Decline series, which is still one of my very favorite series and got me into reading detective-y series, even though she's like a psychologist essentially. That said, some of her standalones have really stood out to me and I loved them. This is her new one, The Favor, which is about a woman who essentially is asked for a favor by her ex-boyfriend, and he's gotten into some trouble. She doesn't know how quite extreme this trouble is until she's in the midst of it, and it sounds like fun. So I don't know if I'll read this. There's a lot of her backlist, or their backlist I should say. It's a couple who writes these. There's a lot of their backlist that I can download on ebook on through my library. So I don't know which one I'll read, but I know I need to read a Nikki French this year for sure. John Boyne is next. Now, I don't have a John Boyne on my hands, even though I know that there are more of his books on my shelf somewhere. But there is a new book that he's come out with in January. It is on my way. This is already ruining a haul, but it is essentially the sequel to the Boy in the Striped Pajamas. If you've read that, you know that you just weep at the end of that book. And the idea that there is some sort of continuation of that story, I am extremely eager to read that. I will probably be reading it in March. John Boyne has written some of the most lovable characters and some of the most despicable characters that I've read. A Ladder to the Sky last year was one of my favorite books of 2022. I just adore his writing style. So yes, I'll be definitely reading a John Boyne this year, sooner than later. Graham Norton is another author that I love. He is mostly well known for his talk show where he interviews all sorts of celebrities. He is hilarious, but the books that he writes are usually much more they're far sadder. I did not know that this man had these just heartfelt, incredibly sad stories in him. I didn't know it. I'm so glad that they are in him though, because I love his stories. And I have one book of his on my Kobo. I think after I've read that, I will have read all of Graham Norton until he comes out with a new one, which I'll be first in line to get a new Graham Norton. I just think he's a beautiful author and a beautiful person. He makes me laugh, and in his books, he makes me cry. So yes, Graham Norton for sure. I want to read again in 2023. Last year, I read my first Evie Wilde, which was The Bass Rock. But I had this book, All the Birds Singing, on my shelves for quite some time because Leanne over at Literary Diversions loves this book. It is a mystery book about Jake White, who lives on a British island. And slowly but surely, his sheep are being killed off in really terrible ways. And he knows there's someone on this little island where he's lived very solitarily that are after him in some way. It sounds extremely creepy, but it's also literary fiction, which is so wonderful. I really loved The Bass Rock. It nearly made it to my top books of 2022, but just not quite. I don't know why, but I really would love to read more by this author. So I'll probably be reading this one because I don't think she's written a ton more other than these two books. Please let me know if I'm wrong about that. Now, it has been some time since I've read a Catherine Ryan Howard book. I do have more books by her that I could choose from. Some of her backlist, which is always wonderful. Runtime is kind of based on a horror movie that becomes horrifying as they're filming it. And we follow an actress who takes the place of the main actress when the main actress kind of drops out of the film. And it is about that story. And I've heard very good things about this. I love the cover of this. And I just really like Catherine Ryan Howard and her stories. They're usually quite dark, pretty gritty. I'm at the edge of my seat. I don't know what is happening. I never guess who done it or anything along those lines. And it's always a good time. So I'd really like to read probably this one, although I do have other books on my shelves by her that I could read. Now, next up is Darcy Coates. Now, I really love this author. Darcy Coates does a ghost story really well every single time, and that's kind of her thing. She's written so many ghost stories, and this is her latest one, Gallows Hill, which takes place at a winery, which sounds wonderful. But I have other books on my shelves, like in my February TBR, I've got Voices in the Snow. So I don't know if I'll read one Darcy Coates or more than one, because it's like a comfort read for someone who likes terrifying things. They are scary. I will say, like, if you were brand new to horror, I do think that a ghost story is a great way to get into it, because it's like, couldn't really happen unless you truly believe in ghosts, which I like. The romantic part of me does want to believe in ghosts, but I don't really believe in ghosts anyway. But there's that separation that makes me feel like ghost stories are the way to get in. Anyway, she does terrify me though when I read her stories. So definitely want to read at least one Darcy Coates book this year. Now, Tayari Jones is next. I have 2 of her books on my shelves. Leaving Atlanta is one of them. And she wrote An American Marriage, which is one of the saddest stories that I have read about what incarceration does, not only to the person who is incarcerated, but to their family. Very, very poignant. And this is about, I think, a serial killer, based on a true story about a serial killer who stalked and killed several Black children in Atlanta. And because they were Black children, the police did not spend as much time trying to get this guy. And it speaks to the racism within our justice system. And I really want to read another Tayari Jones. Stunning writer, absolutely stunning. And I'm so happy that I have a few of her books on my shelves. So I'm not sure if I'll read this or another one by her, but definitely going to read her. And now Candice Carty Williams is next. She's only written 2 books. Queenie was one of my favorite books of, was it 2 years ago or maybe 3 years ago? It just called to me. She writes characters that come alive on the page so much that you feel when you're finished reading her that they're still out there in the world and that you still think about them and hope they're doing well. That's how I felt about Queenie. I just loved her so much. I felt protective of her. And this is a story about a woman who is getting to know her family. Her father had, I don't know how many children by different mothers. And so she's getting to know her half siblings. And then their father comes back into their lives. He's slightly estranged from them. And it's about family dynamics. And she writes family dynamics so well. I've heard it's very different from Queenie, but equally as good. So I am extremely eager to read this. I need to read a Candice Carty Williams this year. I really, really do. Another like gothic historical fiction author I just adore is Stacy Halls. Now this is the only book by her that I haven't read, and it's been sitting on my shelves. And every time I pass by it and I realize that I still haven't read it, I go, how is that possible? What reality are we living in which there's a Stacy Halls book that I have not read? It just seems so wrong. This follows a nurse who ends up going to stay with the Englands to take care of their 2 children, kind of like a governess, but she's also a nurse, so I don't know if there's a factor there, a medical reason that she's there as well. And she starts to learn about Mrs. England, who's very off, very distant from her entire family, from her children, from her husband. And she starts to delve into what is going on with Mrs. England. It just sounds incredible. And this cover, I think I ended up buying this from Book Depository because they have UK covers as well. And the UK cover of this is so much nicer than the US cover. So very fickle-minded, but here we are, and I don't regret it. Now Liz Nugent is next. I love this author. This is Little Cruelties. She has written several books. I have this one and another one on my shelves. Not sure which one I'm going to read because there is also a new book by her coming out in, I believe, July. She writes often characters that are so despicable that you almost feel gross reading the books because you hate them so much and you want terrible things to happen to them. I love Liz Nugent, and I wish that more people would read her because I don't feel like she's getting the kind of love that she really deserves. She's Irish. Maybe she has more success over the pond. I'm not sure. But if you can pick up a Liz Nugent, Like, do it as quickly as possible. This one is about three brothers, I believe. They're essentially trained to yearn and aim to get their mother's attention, and the length that they will go to do that, I think, turns quite sinister. I can't wait to read this. I can't wait to read the other one on my shelves. I've already pre-ordered the one that she's coming out with in July. Yes. Oh my goodness. This makes me so happy. Kate Morton is next. Now, this is the only Kate Morton that I have not read. I've read all of her books. I usually just adore her books. They're historical fiction with a bit of mystery. They go back and forwards in time. And I just really love her. This takes place on Christmas Eve in 1959 in Australia. So it's actually a very hot Christmas Eve. I believe that some sort of murder occurs and becomes very, very well known. And then 60 years later, we have Jess, who's a journalist, who learns that her grandmother Nora has had a fall, and so she rushes to her aid. Nora's getting up there. And she's trying to help her grandmother, and she ends up stumbling upon some papers and some information about this murder that occurred on Christmas Eve 60 years earlier, and realizes that I believe her grandmother was in the midst of that somehow. I don't need to know anymore. I just don't know when I'm going to pick this up. Part of me is like, do I wait until December? That would just be horrible. No, I can't do that. I'll probably just wait until April. So, and read this because I love a Kate Morton, and it is a chunky one, guys, and I am not complaining. Here we are at the end. My gosh, the chattiest video of all time. And this last one is Iain Reid. Iain Reid writes, I don't even know if you would call them horror, because the last book I read by him, Foe, was sci-fi. The one before that was a bit more of a thriller, but this is what happens in an Iain Reid book and why I love him so much. You start reading about a character, a couple of characters, and you quickly realize that you have no idea what's going on, but it's not a great situation, and you wouldn't want to be in that situation. And then at the end, he punches you in the face with the reality of what's actually going on. Now, usually I find it very frustrating when an author holds back things and leans on that to make the plot go forward. But the tension that he creates keeps you going. There is this eerie tension. Sometimes the characters don't know what's going on either, and they're in the same position as you. It's not like the characters are holding things back from you. So in any case, We Spread is his latest, and I believe it takes place in like an old aged home, long care living. I can't remember exactly, but it's about an elderly woman named Penny, and this sense of feeling really uncomfortable in her long-term care residence. She starts to lose her grip on time, and she's wondering, is this because I'm getting older, or is something else happening here? I'm so excited. I'm so excited. And those are all of the books, those are all of the authors, I should say, that I really want to read in 2023. I have a giant grin on my face. I think this is a good plan. I really, really do. I've been checking off as I go the authors that I have read thus far, and let's see if I can get to the end of the year and have checked off all of the boxes. That would be a wonderful thing. Thank you. If you stayed all this time, thank you. You are a gem. I hope that you have a wonderful reading year as well, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye, guys.